Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
Dillian Whyte never misses an opportunity to have a go, take a dig, or just simply troll Deontay Wilder. That's seemingly his kind of MO at this stage. Any chance he gets, he's having a go with Deontay Wilder. This time he's having a go with him for his bench press. And he was unimpressed with the amount of weight Deontay Wilder was lifting. It was 310 pounds. In the UK and kg, I think it was over 100 kg, I know that, but it's kind of right in, it's probably been around the 120 mark, give or take, in around that. So that's probably in response to Deontay Wilder hearing that Fury's going to come in at 300 pounds, or so Fury is he's saying he's going to do it. Whether he does or not remains to be seen. He's definitely going to come in heavy in around the 270s, but whether it's going to be full blown 300, that might be pushing it. I don't know how exactly. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that, but we'll wait and see. So Deontay Wilder is essentially getting kind of used to having, to just move that kind of weight, because if Fury is, but he will be heavier, but if he's that much heavier, I think Wilder's thinking is, I better be ready to kind of shift that weight. Dillian Whyte having a go, saying basically, he lifts more than that in the gym, no problem, this, that, and the other. Just Dillian Whyte and you can tell Dillian Whyte is someone who is very much into his weight training. You can just see it in his physique. If you look at Dillian Whyte when he turned pro in 2012, he was a hell of a liar. I think he was in the two. If he wasn't in the 220s, he was certainly in the 230s. He even had abs. That was back when that Jack 3D stuff, which you can still get today, but I believe back then it had good stuff in it, and now it doesn't. Let's make it out what you will. But yeah, Dillian Whyte, you can tell he's definitely a big weight lifter and stuff like that. Now, me personally with boxing and weights, even though I've obviously watched boxing in the modern era where the training is very different to how it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. It's very different. There's more emphasis on nutrition, strength and conditioning training, etc., etc. I'm still someone who likes the old fashioned, who likes the old school, and I always believe that lifting weights, especially if you're looking at like boxing, you're trying to replicate what's going to happen in the ring. So if you're looking at someone and they're going to be coming kind of trying to put their weight on you, lean on you, for me personally, lifting weights is not the ideal preparation. I prefer more functional training. I look at George Foreman, certainly a prime George Foreman. Foreman was one of the most physically strong heavyweights, possibly of all time, because George Foreman, people said his strength was just incredible in his prime and even out of his prime. Even when it was the comeback George Foreman, the fact that he would just ragdoll people with ease, it was just incredible. It was a testament to his strength. But if you look at George Foreman, he'll tell you himself, when he was up and coming, even when he was only a young pro, Dick Sadler, who was his original coach, he had him out shoveling clay, chopping wood, packing like a wheelbarrow full of clay and just pushing that around. What is that doing? It's functional training. It's not the same as lifting barbells, lifting, dead weight, stuff like that. That's more, what George Foreman was doing was more kind of, I just said it was more relevant to what would happen in the ring. Obviously, you're not going to be pushing a wheelbarrow around, but it's basically you're shifting the weight, as opposed to just the weightlifting where you're either pulling or you're pushing, one or the other, So I always felt that is something that's not done enough in boxing, and I've done some functional training myself, and I much prefer it. I know when George Foreman's comeback, he used to get but nowadays you can get like a kind of, it's like a harness or something like that it's called, and he used to just move like cars, like jeeps and trucks and stuff like, well, not trucks, but he used to move jeeps. And again, that's kind of more relevant as far as I'm concerned, because you're pulling that dead weight and you're pushing it. When you're seeing guys doing a lot of weights, and I've seen so many fighters, not even heavyweights, like lower level fighters, like lower weight fighters, I should say, who've just done an awful lot of weight, and you can see it straight away in their stance, in how they throw their punches, it just everything. They're just a lot more upright. They're a lot more stiff. The punches don't flow the same as people who just abandon the weights and just focus more on functional training. That's what I prefer to see in boxing. You can call me old school, but I listen to trainers like Emmanuel Stewart, R.I.P., Brendan Ingle, R.I.P., who just, to listen to them talk about boxing, and even Manny Stewart was never big on his fighters doing weights. Ron Lyle, in his, when he was in prison, remember Ron Lyle in the 70s was a very good heavyweight. Gave Muhammad, him and George Foreman, that was a great fight. Ron Lyle, when he was in prison, I think he done something like up to 1,000 push-ups a day in prison. Ernie Shavers, who's one of the hardest punchers of all time, he used to just, I think it was get bales of hay and move them, chop wood relentlessly, these kind of things. And the thing I find amazing about them heavyweights is they went 15 rounds. You've got guys today who, even with all the strength and conditioning training, you look at someone like Dillian Whyte, take the Marius Wack fight out of the equation, he took that on short notice, but if you look at the Joseph Parker fight, he had a full camp for that, and the 12th round he had nothing left. These guys back in the day were going 15 rounds. 15 rounds, getting hit with little 8-ounce horsehair gloves, because heavyweights did. Certainly back in the 70s, they used 8-ounce gloves. I think they went to 10-ounce in the 90s, but I know back in the 70s they kind of were going between 8 to 10. Imagine George Foreman hitting you with an 8-ounce horsehair glove. Imagine that. That's a scary thought. But I loved that kind of style of training. That to me is kind of something that's lacking in boxing. I think that, when you talk, especially when you talk to kind of newer sport fans, doesn't even have to be boxing fans, they really believe that, like, they look at someone like, I remember a couple of years ago in a job, talk about boxing and the old kind of school boxing. I talk about Henry Armstrong, Jack Dempsey, Jack Johnson, the kind of training that they would do, and they'd be like, oh, well, that's just so outdated. Nowadays we have, nutrition who can pinpoint this. It's like, and I'm seeing these guys blowing gaskets after 3 rounds. I'm seeing these guys barely able to keep the pace. Back in the 20s, it wasn't fought at a frantic pace. To be fair, it wasn't, but still, there was none of that. They're fighting closer to their natural weight. That's what I like in boxing. That's what I think a lot of people are shying away from. I look at Marciano when he was a heavyweight. I ever watched a documentary about him, and they said that his whole kind of meal in a day would consist of greens, carbs, and plenty of meat. 2 pounds of steak. That was his whole meal. If you said that to a nutritionist nowadays, oh, you have to get your macros, you have to get your this, you have to get your that, you have to weigh it, do it to a T, it has to be this, the food can't touch, etc, etc. Holy mother of God. And back then it was just a case of dish it up, eat it. Simple as. Did Marciano have stamina issues? He did in his arse. He was a very light heavy, he'd be a light heavyweight by today's standards, but even still, I look at all that and I think, if I was ever training a fighter, I'd be focusing more on that than I would be on, there's the strength and conditioning. It's just, I don't put as much emphasis as a lot of other people would. With regards to Deontay Wilder, I hope Deontay Wilder isn't packing on muscle, because that's one thing I didn't touch on. Now, I have another prediction video on this fight yet, but I've given my 2 cents on it. But I think Deontay Wilder would be well advised to come in light for this fight. In the first Tyson Fury fight, he was 212. Bear in mind, he wore a mask in the weigh-in. So you would say he'd take maybe about 2 pounds off for that mask. He was about 210. I think when he's in the 2 teens, we see the best Wilder. He's at his sharpest. He's fast. He can get his shots off better. I was watching Hatman's video on this, and he was saying as well, when you see Wilder in the high 220s, not even the low 220s, he's still quite used. When he's in the high 220s, that's when you see him look a bit bad. He's not as fluent as he is when he's in the 2 teens. I think that's Wilder's natural walk around weight in the 2 teens. And you have fighters who, even a heavyweight, even though they don't have to make weight, there's a certain weight that they know they're most effective at. I remember David Hay speaking about this when he first turned over into heavyweight, or became a heavyweight, that he said in around the 210 to 215 region was what he made it his goal to weigh in around that, even though he didn't have to. He said that was kind of when he felt he was at his sharpest, he was his fastest. He could, when he was higher than that, because remember against John Ruiz, he was in, I think, 220. And I think he even said himself that's too heavy. Obviously, when he made his comeback against Bellew and all, he was in the 220s, but he was injured. He had so many injuries, it was just not even worth it. The list would just stretch. This video would be an hour long if I mentioned the amount of issues that David Hay had with injuries after he fought Chisora. But I always feel that, the emphasis is too much on weights. The emphasis on fighters nowadays is, I didn't have a good performance, I need to pack on weight. Well, it's not always the answer. You look at Shannon Briggs. Shannon Briggs never had good stuff. He had asthma, to be fair, but he still does. But Shannon Briggs, when he was up and coming in the 90s, pretty much after he fought Lennox Lewis, he was always in the 220s. Still had very good punching power. Then he packed on, and you just here thinking of this is just so silly. You've someone with poor stamina, he has asthma, what does he do? Packs on something like 30 odd pounds of muscle. I mean, what the hell? That was never going to end well. And Briggs' stamina, his punching power didn't change. No noticeable difference. His stamina was just as bad. The speed was gone because Briggs was quick. You know, Briggs was quick. You know, in his younger days, but the speed went with all that muscle. I mean, what benefit was it? What benefit would you actually say that was a benefit putting on all that muscle? It wasn't. Maybe for aesthetics, yeah, it was more pleasing on the eyes, but if you want to be more pleasing on the eyes, that's what bodybuilding contests are for. It's not in the boxing ring. So, as I said, I'm making this video really long, but I just give my 2 cents on weights and boxing and what I think. And at the end of the day, I certainly have seen a lot more with people in boxing. I remember in 2017, I was still trying to make a go of, trying to make a go of boxing as an amateur back then. And I was in the boxing gym a lot back then. And I remember going on a night out with a few friends. And like, these would be casuals. And a lot of them would be in the normal weight gym. And they were all saying to me, like, I've never boxed. But I reckon I'd be quite useful. I reckon I'd, be able to handle myself real well. I'm like, based off of what? And they're like, well, look at that, I can bench this, I'm lifting these weights in the gym. Like, mate, if you went in there, right, if you sparred for the first time, you've never boxed before, and you think you'd be good just because you lift more weights, the first meaningful shot that lands on you, your nose is going to bleed like a tap, your eyes are going to water like hell, and 9 times out of 10 you'll say, this isn't for me. It's that kind of, I don't know where people get this idea from, that because you lift some more weights it'll automatically mean you're a good boxer. I mean, look at Andy Ruiz. Look at Andy Ruiz what he did to Anthony Joshua in the first fight. Does Andy Ruiz look like someone you'd expect to beat Anthony Joshua? No. In terms of aesthetics, obviously technically yes, but aesthetically no. You look at that, you think the weightlifter is going to beat the fat guy. Well, the fat guy beat the weightlifter. Why? Because it's not a bodybuilding contest, boxing. It's not about how much you can lift outside of the ring. It's about, you're in the ring, can you fight? You can fight. You might not look the best, but you can fight. You're a bodybuilder. Can you fight? You hit the bag. Geez, the bag hit you back. Geez, I've never seen that before. Well, you clearly can't fight. That's kind of the way it is. It's always funny when you do see a bodybuilder hitting the bag, because they actually, they can't punch most of the time, and they're gassed after about 30 seconds. Like, if you get them to sprint on a bag, they can't do it. I don't really like sprinting on a bag, but seriously, if you ever did see it, they can't do it. And I'm not someone, I don't really like sprinting on a bag. I don't think that I could see a benefit as an amateur, but as a pro, not really. I wouldn't. If I had a fighter and he was a pro, I wouldn't be like, don't sprint in the bag. I don't. Use the bag to improve your punching power. Don't sprint on it. And to be honest, I don't even like the pads. I prefer the shield. The little shield where it's like, the only time I can see pads, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'll just finish with this. The only time I can really say that I would use a pad if I was training to fight would be if I had the foam kind of thing as a kind of slip throw right hand. That's the only kind of time, just to time that into you, to get your timing more so, because I don't actually think the pads will do anything if you're doing like two-handed pads and doing this. But if you got the foam, it's like they use them in swimming as well. You got the pad to kind of just like fake a shot and slip and throw right, just to get that like muscle memory. Same with a hook. Yeah, that I can see use with. And one thing I don't like as well with pads, again going off, is when they move the pad towards you. I never liked that. Whenever I would take, like, and I've never really trained fighters, but I've helped out with the gyms with pads and all. Whenever I would take someone on the pads, I wouldn't move it, because Emmanuel Stewart was not someone who liked pads. But when he did, if you look at some of his pad work with McClellan, he just held the pad straight. You punch through it, because if you do that, if you come, you're not punching through it. At the end of the day, your opponent's not going to move his head forward to let you hit him. So I always found that was more useful. Started this video talking about Dillian Whyte and talked about boxing training. Well, I hope you got something out of it anyway. Gonna leave it there. I hope you enjoyed the video. Oh, by the way, no. I'll finish it with Dillian Whyte tie Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury. It's a fight that I'm still looking forward to. Dillian Whyte, Deontay Wilder. Will we ever see it? I don't know. Deontay Wilder is seemingly, I don't know. Deontay Wilder, I believe, would take Dillian Whyte that fight in an instant. It seems like his team don't want that fight. I don't know why, because I think stylistically, Deontay Wilder knocks Dillian Whyte out. Little bit more competitive now than I think it would have been a couple of years ago. I think if you talk about Deontay Wilder 2017, 2018, that fight wouldn't have went 4 rounds, in my opinion. Some people say that he didn't want to fight Dillian Whyte because Dillian Whyte has a bit of a cronk style. He can move forward, he can jab on the front foot, he can hook. People look at what Tyson Fury did in the rematch, and they say, well, based upon that, Dillian Whyte. I'm like, whoa. Dillian Whyte, he's not as good defensively. He's not as quick as Tyson Fury. He's not as quick in his feet or as quick of hand. So whilst Tyson Fury can do that and get out of range, Dillian Whyte is going to be still in range and open to that right hand from Deontay Wilder. Dillian Whyte has a very leaky defense, and in terms of who takes a shot better, I'd say they're about even Steven at this stage. Dillian Whyte has more power in the left hook, I think, than Tyson Fury. But in terms of who's the better chin, I'd say at this stage they're even Steven. You know, maybe you could say Dillian Whyte has the slightly better chin. You know, considering Steve Cunningham and Pike have dropped Fury, but I wouldn't say it's massive between the two personally. So that's my thoughts on that. Let me know yours in the comment section. Thoughts on Dillian Whyte, the comments he made about Deontay Wilder, and thoughts on weights and boxing and some of the training tips that I gave. And if there are any fighters who are looking to box amateur or anything like that, if they want any more tips, feel free to ask. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at BoxingGman, and I can give you some tips of what I think is good ideas for moving forward if you're starting out boxing. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your thoughts down below. Smash the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe, of course, if you're new. #GMAnsRocks, all that good stuff. For now, lads and lassies, I'll talk to you. Peace.